JM Frey, welcome to the Right in the Head podcast. Thanks very much for joining me today. I will just point out that we are doing this on a weekend. I always point that out when the guests have been kind enough to give me their weekend time. So just to start with, thank you very much for doing that. How's the weekend going so far?
Pretty good. I just got back from the doctor's, no problems there. You can't see behind me though. I'm in Toronto, Canada, and we're going to lose about 24 degrees in 24 hours.
Oof.
So when I left the house this morning, it was +3. It's now -11, and it's probably going to get down to somewhere like -30. And there's a huge snowstorm happening behind those curtains.
Wow. I have no response. My brain doesn't know what to do with that. I
Yeah,
grew up, as you know, in the UK where I thought I knew what cold was.
no.
No,
No, there are parts of
no.
Canada that probably this weekend will be colder than the surface of the planet Mars.
What?
Yeah. Mars gets
Wow.
to like -40 something, and there are places in Saskatchewan and Manitoba that get to like -50.
I think we need to get Mr. Musk to look at that before he's terraforming Mars. He should be trying to fix that. That's terrible.
But you don't want to fix it because that's the way it's supposed to be,
Right. Fair
right?
enough. We will
You
let
change
nature be.
that, and everywhere else gets hotter too, and then nobody's happy with that.
Right. Right. Well, people in the UK might like it to be a bit warmer, but anyway, different subject. We'll come back to
Yes,
that. We'll
different
do a part
conversation,
two.
different day.
Yeah, part two, all about climate change. So, on today's episode of the Screenwriting podcast, we're talking about fan fiction. And
Yes.
I love this because I'm an idiot when it comes to fan fiction. I know nothing. So this is as much for me as it is for anyone listening to this. I want to dive in with actually just a brief sort of what is fan fiction. Obviously, I know a bit more now because since you agreed to do the podcast, I researched.
Yes.
But I still think, in your experience, what is fan fiction as a whole? How does that? Is it an industry? Would you say is it an industry or an art form? How does it
It's
work?
it's an art form. It's not an industry because nobody's making any money on it. Um,
Well,
and
then neither is screenwriting.
well, but you have the legal right to sell what you're working on as a
Mm,
screenwriter. The thing with fan works, and I'm just going to use the term fan works to encompass fan fiction, fan art, fan comics, filking, Filk, filking, which is like fan songs written about things in a fanish way,
huh.
cosplay, all of this I'm putting under the umbrella of fan works. It's very important to differentiate the difference between a fan work and an official tie-in, because for an official tie-in or an IP merch or an IP book, you're getting paid and you have permission to use that. If you're making a fan work, you are doing an homage, or it's basically it's protected under fair use laws, but you can't make money on it, or rather you can't make a significant amount of money on it, because there are fan artists out there who like sell prints, but the idea is that you're not supposed to make profit off of somebody else's IP, intellectual property. um,
Interesting.
if you're selling a print, you're really just selling it for the cost of printing that print, or making that painting, or
Mm,
etching that glass, um, or sewing that costume. um, you have to be very clear about that. I mean, that's one of the important, less now, more in the 90s when people like Anne Rice were suing fan artists and fan fiction writers. But there's that very distinct difference between writing something for profit and writing something for the fun and joy of your community, which is protected under fair use law.
got it.
It's not an industry. I'm just going to make that very clear. It is,
Right.
however, a community and a celebration of creativity and art. It's a celebration of joy. It's a celebration of inspiring one another. The way that I always say it is that if you consume something, you watch a Marvel movie, you watch a TV show, you read a comic book, and you love it so much that that love bubbles out of you as creativity. You love it so much, you want to draw those characters. You want to dress up like those characters. You want to write songs about those characters. You want to write stories about those characters. So, fan fiction is basically, fan works are basically anything that somebody creates, an original thing that somebody creates based on the intellectual property, pre existing intellectual property or media text created by somebody else.
Got it.
So if you
Got
want to
it.
go by that very basic definition, yes, fan fiction that I write based on Stargate Atlantis is fan fiction, but so is Dante's Inferno, because the whole thing is about Dante going through hell and hanging out with Virgil and Plato and all of these historical figures who tell him he's really cool and show him around hell. I mean, if that's not Mary Sue self-insert fan fiction, I don't know what is. Um, the Iliad is
Mm,
kind of fan fiction of the Odyssey.
right.
Shakespeare is kind of RPF, real people fiction, of British monarchs. So it's a very broad definition.
Kind of hard to define at those edges.
It is, and a lot of people use those edges to legitimize um, art that is inspired by other things. But I don't think fan fiction needs legitimizing. Writing a story because you love other stories, you don't have to defend yourself. You're doing something joyful. You want to write another a Robin Hood story, so now there's one more story in the story cycle in the canon. You're E.B. White and you want to write the once and future king. You don't need to legitimize this by saying, oh well, they're out of copyright and it's a folk story. E.B. White's The Once and Future King is just as legitimate as the fan fiction that I posted on AO3 yesterday.
We will continue the chat with Jess in just a moment. First of all, if you're enjoying today's episode, go subscribe to the channel. We put out weekly episodes just like this one to help all of us screenwriters make a real go of it in this here crazy industry. You can also leave us a comment. Tell us more about your experience with fan fiction. Have you given it a try? Are you thinking about giving it a try? Also, any requests for future episodes. I do read all of the comments and I will respond. All right, let's get back to talking to Jess. Tell me more about that. Tell me more about your fan fiction specifically. So we've had the sort of broad definition. What's your experience with it? I think that would help to really focus my mind and maybe the minds of other people on what this is that we're talking about. How do you do it?
So when I started writing fan fiction, I started in 1990 when I was in high school. And a friend of mine and we were really into Sailor Moon at the time. A lot of people were. It was the first sort of outside of the Transformers in the 80s. And then some of the mecha anime that we didn't really realize was anime. It was definitely the first magical girl anime that a lot of people in North America were exposed to. And the kind of storytelling in that really lends itself to celebrating characters coming in, celebrating being part of a friend group. So, of course, a lot of young ladies my age were like, I want to be a Sailor Scout. I'm going to write stories about how I become a Sailor Scout the same way all the other Sailor Scouts became Sailor Scouts. So we started doing that. And then, of course, the big Harry Potter boom happened. I was in first year university when that happened. And that was really the first time a fandom got its teeth into me. And I was like, oh, I need to tell stories about this. Because for all of her terrible politics and horrible beliefs about the sexuality of people that she should not be talking about, she wrote a world filled with places for stories to go. Lots of crevices, lots of side characters, lots of things happening over there that I want to reframe the lens to and see that. So a lot of my high school career or university was deep in the Harry Potter fandom and writing Harry Potter fan fiction, but also doing Harry Potter cosplay. And from there, it was right around then that someone suggested to me that I should maybe try writing an original book. And I hadn't really thought about it. I had grown up a child actor, so I understood what scripts were and how they worked and where you got ideas. I understood improv. I understood story structure. And then I went to university for acting, which included some screenwriting and some playwriting courses. So I understood story structure, and I was using that in the fan fiction I was writing as a hobby. And someone suggested I write an original book, and circumstances happened and I had the time to do so, and I tried writing it, and it actually, it's I don't know if you can see, it's this book right here, TRIPTYCH, and it started as a Stargate fan fiction. I
Okay.
will not
Okay.
lie. I had been working on a Stargate time travel story, and I thought, because at that point, then I had I had merged into a new fandom, and I was really big into Stargate. And I thought, this is an interesting story. If I stop writing it as a fan fiction and then scratch the serial number, call it, and make it original, what could I do with it? Where could I go with it? And where I could go was to the Lambda Literary Awards and to the Publishers Weekly Best Books of the Year list. That's where I went with it.
Very
Um,
nice. Very nice.
yeah, which is quite glib of me to say, but
Glib
um,
away.
but this book started as Stargate Atlantis fan fiction.
Right.
And then from there I did write a lot of stories that weren't fan fiction based, but I still do write fan fiction for the fun of it. I wrote Sherlock fan fiction, and um, up until last week, I wrote Sandman and Good Omens fan fiction because I enjoyed the worlds that the creator made. More, I loved the performances that the actors gave. And for me, writing fan fiction is always about is craving more stories in that
Mm.
world. If there's only
Mm-hmm.
28 episodes,
Right.
what happens in the 29th?
Right.
Or if there's 28 episodes, but there's a time skip, what happened in that time skip? What happened when Joyce Summers found out that Buffy Summers was the Slayer,
Mm.
closed the door on Spike, and then Joyce and Buffy had a conversation? We don't
Right.
see that conversation on television, but I want to know what happens. What happened with so and so's tragic backstory? We know that their wife died, but what happened? And for me, fan fiction, through all of those fandoms that I've been in, has always been about the desire to see a part of the story that the camera pans away from.
Yeah, I mean, my mind is racing now on all the things that I could write if I just looked at the shows, movies, and even books that I've engaged with and wanted more.
Yeah,
Wow. I would for sure write the next installment of the TV show Mindhunter because they cancelled it after the second season and
there is a huge
it was
fandom.
just warming up. It
You
was
you
just
don't you
getting
don't even
going.
need to read, or sorry, write that, because you could go read it. There's
I
probably Mindhunter, I know, is a very big fandom.
right.
There's
Right.
thousands of stories that you could
Yeah.
go find on Archive of Our Own or fanfiction.net or Tumblr. Um,
Links in the description, guys. Links in the description.
so that's basically what fan fiction is. It's them saying, people saying, I love this story, but I want to see another perspective of it. I want to see more of it. I want to
Right.
see what happened before, what happened after. I want to see what happens if this unresolved sexual tension between these actors turns into something in the
Mm.
show. What if these two characters did bone? What would that
Right.
be like?
Right.
I
I,
want to
I
see
wonder
a
if there's
story.
somewhere a fan fiction of Mulder and Scully finally getting together because that was how many
Yes.
seasons of
The answer
that?
is yes. The answer
Right.
is many. The answer
Right.
is millions.
I assume there probably had to be. Uh,
Yeah, because you're not the only one who wants to know. And if
right.
you don't want to write it, then you can find it, you can read it, you can draw it, you can listen to. I know there are songs about it.
Wow.
Um,
Wow. This
but
is a
it's
whole new
also,
world for me. Whole new
yeah.
world.
And then there's the alternate universe stuff where it's like, okay, I Mulder and Scully, I would like to see them get together, but let's instead of making them FBI agents, let's make Mulder a fumbling, sweet conspiracy theorist, coffee barista,
Okay.
and Scully is the regular who shows up every morning, says three words to him, does not want to engage with his tin hat craziness, and then they slowly fall in love. So you're taking these characters and you have to believably recreate them as the same character in a
Mm.
completely different setting.
And you're
So
not.
people
Sorry. Go ahead. Sorry.
so people do coffee shop alternate universes, and they do high school alternate universes.
Mm.
Or if you're a marine biologist, you're going to make them marine biologists and a Greenpeace advocate. So you're taking the core of who these people are and putting them in space, underground, or you're turning them into elves and dwarves, or if they are elves and dwarves, you're turning them into humans
Right.
in the
Right.
21st century, right?
And you're not doing any of this to try and sell it per se. You're doing
No.
it for the love of it, but there are places you share it. There's like you said, a community.
Yes. Yeah. And some people choose not to share it either. There's a nickname for that. It's called drawer fic because you write it and then you stick it in a drawer. And you might share it among your friends, but you might not.
Right.
The whole thing is
Right.
about the exercise. It's about the joy of the creation and sharing the
Interesting.
joy of the creation. Like when people say, why do you go to science fiction and fantasy conventions? And why do you do it dressed up like a Star Trek character? It's because I have, first off, it's a visual signifier. If you're walking through a room and you go, ah, that person is also dressed like a character from Hell of a Boss, I know that I'm going to have a great conversation with them.
Right.
I'm about to make a new friend. I'm going to sneak
We
up
have
on that
common
person.
ground. Yeah.
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 We're about to have a wonderful moment together.
Mm.
Um, so you are signifying to the people around you, this is what I'm into, this is who I am, this is what I love. But it's also that thing where it's like, I love it so much that I want to participate in it. Not that I am having problems dealing with the line between fiction and reality. I know it's fiction, but I want to be an ensign on the Enterprise. Why? Who wouldn't want to
Mm.
be an ensign on the Enterprise? And for 5 minutes, while I'm posing for a photo or I'm talking to a child, I mean, I used to dress up like Belle in the big ball gown, the big gold ball gown with the five hoop skirt and the hair like this. And
Me
yeah,
too, by the way. Me too. I loved
yeah,
it.
yeah. Um, and I would talk to other Disney fans and we would discuss things. But when the little girls would come up to me and be like, "Hi, Princess Belle," for 5 minutes I got to be Belle,
Right. It's
right?
amazing. Yeah, again, opening my mind to a lot of possibilities here. I love it. I feel like I now understand fan fiction better, at least. Let's bring
Yeah.
this to the screenwriting audience.
Mhm.
How does this impact your skills, your craft as a screenwriter? Because I know that you would recommend try fan fiction even if you haven't before, and I'm definitely going to, having had this
Mhm.
conversation and our pre-episode conversation. I'm on board. Why specifically fan fiction? Why do you think that can help develop your craft as a screenwriter?
Because you learn how to mimic a voice. Um, so the best fan fiction stories are the ones where the characters sound like themselves. Even if you put Mulder and Scully in a coffee shop, they should still sound like Mulder and Scully. So they should still behave like Mulder and Scully. So if you can learn how to listen to Gillian Anderson's speech patterns, where she puts the comma, the kinds of phrases Scully would use, the kinds of metaphors that Mulder would use, then you can mimic that. And so for a lot of your students who are probably hoping to work in television, something you have to do when you're applying to television shows is to write a sample script, to write a spec
Right,
script,
right,
right? You're going to write a spec of Doctor Who, you're going to write a spec of Mindhunter, you're going to write a spec of Grey's Anatomy. If you have honed your craft, if you know how Meredith Grey speaks, but not just how Meredith Grey speaks, with her mouth, but what is the language of the show? What kind of phrases are used often? Where do the commercial breaks come? What kind of amping up do they do before they hit the penultimate scene of the show and then you get the climax? What kind of climaxes do they introduce every week? If you start picking things like that apart for fan fiction and practicing in fan fiction, then when you sit down to write a spec, it's a lot easier. And it doesn't have to be a spec of specifically that show. If you're looking to do a medical drama, then you could go write specs of Firefly, focusing on Simon and River, because that's the medical part of the show. Um, or the other way around, if you want a spec on Doctor Who, you could go write some X-Files, because there's that element in Doctor Who of the people who are left behind trying to find the Doctor. What if you wrote a spec script that's entirely X-Files-ish? You know? So it gives you practice, but also the ability to look at a media text and understand the pattern of it, the voice of it, the tone of it. What phrases do these characters use a lot? What physical tics do people have? Ferdinand Kingsley, the actor, has a habit of tugging on his earlobe when he's playing characters who are nervous or lying or trying to distract. This is an acting tic that a lot of people have noticed that he does, but specifically, he does it with deliberate choice as Hob Gadling in The Sandman. So when you go read Sandman fan fiction, there's my Sandman fan fiction, I have him tugging on his ear every time he's confessing something, every time he's being honest, and it's uncomfortable.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
When we spoke to kind of do the intro call, you mentioned the MCU.
Yes.
Big fan, I have to say. And it really opened my mind when you brought that into this conversation about fan fiction. You made a really good point that I hadn't thought about before.
Yes.
This journey from the very first Iron Man all the way to Agatha all along. Talk to me about that, because I really did find this very interesting from this perspective of it's kind of fan fiction.
Well, it is. So what Kevin Feige and Jon Favreau made with Iron Man. Now, Jon Favreau wrote the script, but of course, as the executive producer, Feige set the tone. But that movie basically established what the MCU sounds like, looks like, and performs like. And it doesn't matter who else has written the MCU, because that's what was established. Every TV show and every movie after that is basically fan fiction of Iron Man, because every other writer is taking what Favreau and Feige did, and Robert Downey Jr., because a lot of the quick patter and a lot of the speech patterns and a lot of the sense of humor that we get in the MCU actually comes from Robert Downey Jr.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But you take that, and then you get people writing Loki or Agatha all along, or the Falcon and the Winter Soldier, or the Hulk movies, or whatever, and they have to make it sound like those people exist in the same universe. So if you go watch the first Iron Man movie and then watch Agatha all along, you could reasonably believe that Agatha and Tony Stark could have a conversation, and you could imagine what that would sound like, even though those characters have never met in the shows, because the tone and the pattern and the mood of the first movie has been replicated so authentically through every other property, you could still believe that those two characters could meet and talk. You could not see Agatha meeting Captain James T. Kirk from the original Star Trek. Those are two different
Oh, now I want to see that.
Oh, I'm sure somebody's written it, or you could write it. But those are two different vibes, right? Like,
Yeah.
how would you make that mesh? You know, Robert Downey Jr.'s Iron Man and Keanu Reeves' John Wick. How do you make that work? And there are crossover fan fictions out there where, like, people do make it work,
Right.
which I think is stunning, when you can make characters from one property and characters from another property behave believably for both properties in the same scene.
Yeah. John Wick versus Iron Man. That's oof,
Well, I don't
enticing.
think there'd be verses. I think they'd team up.
Oh, I like a good versus.
But verses
Speaking
would
of
be fun.
which, what you were just saying about the MCU put my mind over to DC, and I don't think they've done as good of a job as that.
I don't think they
I
have. And I think a lot of the problem is there's not an overarching tone.
mm-hmm.
The
Yeah.
Wonder Woman movie feels very, very different from the Superman movie. And the
Yes.
Diana Prince that we were given in the Justice League movie does not feel, even though it's portrayed by the same actor, does
Mm-hmm.
not feel like the same person to me.
And
That's a figure.
I think we saw this when they did Batman versus Superman. The
Yeah.
movie did not do well. And for me, it felt like these are two different worlds coming together. The Superman that I know from Man of
Mm.
Steel doesn't belong in this world of Batman and Gotham.
Yes.
It just didn't quite click. And this is
Yeah.
before I'd had this conversation with you, so I wouldn't have known the reasons per se, but yeah, now that
Yes.
I think back on it, that I think that did play into it.
Yeah. So I was thinking after our conversation, I was thinking of what's a really good example of how you could use the skills that you hone as a fan fiction writer to do a Hollywood blockbuster film.
Mm,
And this is sort of the example I came up with. A lot of fan fiction writers have paid attention to the fact that Tony Stark has a thing with food. Now, he's often talking about food or he's eating food in a lot of scenes. Some of that is Robert Downey Jr. Robert Downey Jr. hides food on set, and the set decorators hate him for it. Or
I did not know that.
if there's real food on set, he will eat the real food, even if he's not supposed to. So
Mm,
that moment on the helicarrier in the first Avengers movie, where it's Steve and Tony and Bruce talking over the scepter, and they're having the conversation, and Tony turns and he offers some blueberries to
mm.
Bruce. He goes, "Blueberry?" That was unscripted. That was improv. That was Robert Downey Jr. hiding blueberries on set. But it's also
Yeah.
become a bit of a character thing because in the first Iron Man, he's drinking the green smoothies. The very first thing he says when he gets back from the cave is, "I want a cheeseburger." He's eating the
Mm,
cheeseburgers. When he meets Doctor Strange, he talks about the ice cream. There is a
right.
fixation with
Yeah,
Tony
and
Stark with
when he
food.
wakes up at the end of Avengers, the first thing he says is the thing about the
Shawarma.
chicken shawarma place or
Yeah,
shawarma,
yeah, I
I
want
think
to
it
try the
is.
shawarma.
Yeah.
So if you start paying attention to that,
Mm,
and you're going to write a story, obviously, to keep him in character, he's going to have a discussion about food. But maybe let's go darker with this, because a lot of this obsession with food we see in Tony Stark happens after the Ten Rings and the abduction. So they had no problems torturing him, waterboarding him, trying to drown him, threatening to take his heart out of his hands. What if they starved him? That's not outside of the realm of possibility. What if they withheld food for cooperation? So, what if the reason he squirrels food away everywhere? What if the reason he has food on him all the time? What if the reason that it's top of mind for him is now he has food trauma and he has resource hoarding trauma? This is not something that has ever been addressed in the movies.
mm,
But what if you
right.
get hired to write Iron Man 4 and you want to have a really good dark B plot?
That's so interesting.
Yeah. And now you have
Yeah.
something. Now you have Chekhov's gun
Mm.
because this is something that's been set up and set up and set up and set up. And now you, as the writer of Iron Man 4, gets to fire it.
You get to do in a way, the origin story of what we already know about Tony that had before.
Yes. Yeah.
I
And
love
that's a
that.
fan fiction. That's a skill that you get from fan fiction because you're paying attention to the
Mm.
fact that every time he's on I almost said on screen, on stage, he either has food or he's talking about food. Um, and that's just something that you pick up as you're watching shows or you're watching TV or you're listening to audio dramas with the intent of replicating them. You start catching these patterns.
Mm. I want you to now take me to school in a certain way
Okay.
to use a very Tony Stark way of phrasing this. As somebody that knows nothing about fan fiction, I wouldn't have thought of it as a way of enhancing my screenwriting for specific reasons. So
Mhm.
one of them is, well, fan fiction, I'm just using existing characters. Screenwriting, typically, I'm coming up with. What am I not seeing there? Do you think it's because so much of character development transfers over? Or is there another way of looking at it that you could sort of reframe it so that no, this is still a good practice for you, even in the world of developing new characters, new worlds, that kind of thing?
Yeah. No one is ever coming up with a character out of thin air.
Hmm.
It is a conceit of creativity that the muse touches me, and I come up with something that is genius that no one has ever
Right,
done ever.
right,
That's not true.
right. I'm a
The
vessel.
Yeah, no, that's not how creativity works. You pour water into the well, a cup of this, a cup of that. I watched this movie, I read this poem, I listened to this song. All of that goes into your well, and then you mix it around and you draw a cup out and you take a drink. And it is made up of molecules of everything you've ever consumed, but also everyone you've ever met, every conversation you've ever had, every experience you've ever had. So making up a fresh new character, you're not just coming up with someone off the top of your head. You're going, well, I'd love this character to have my brother's habit of talking over me at dinner. So this character is going to talk over people, and that's going to be a reflection of the fact that they're a self-aggrandizing. Oh, I should be careful. My brother's not self-aggrandizing. I'm not. My brother doesn't even talk over me at dinner. It's just an example, Paul. I'm sorry.
It's all fiction, all fiction.
Yeah, but maybe I want to have this trait from this and this trait from this, and if I want this person to be very self-important. So in Time and Tide, there's a villain character who is basically an amalgamation of all the worst traits of the misogynistic, toxic, wealthy billionaires we see in the world right now. Because I want this person to be vile and to think so highly of themselves, but to be so cut off from what humanity really is. I was like, well, who is like that? Who is just so lost in their own heads and doesn't understand what the world is like? Oh, like Elon Musk and Donald Trump and these sorts of people, Jeff Bezos. I was like, okay, so let me take a bit of this from this person and this person's the way that they lie to themselves and lie so often that they start believing it, that it actually was true. Like King George IV never fought at the Battle of Waterloo. Never. He never stepped foot on a battlefield. But by the end of his life, he'd been telling the lie that he had been at Waterloo so much that he actually believed that he actually had fought at the Battle of Waterloo. And I was like, oh, that's a really interesting trait. If someone keeps lying to themselves enough, they're eventually going to start believing it's true.
Did
So
people know that he wasn't on the battlefield, or are we breaking news right now? Is this?
no, people knew. Even at the time,
Oh,
people knew.
I thought we
Yeah,
had a podcast
unfortunately.
exclusive.
Oh,
Damn it.
no, no. But that was something I was like, okay, so I'm going to give that trait to my villain, that he lies so much that he starts believing it's true. So any character you're making for an original story, you're going to make them up of people you've met, stories you've heard, character traits that you've witnessed, whether from real people or from fictional people.
Got it. Got it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there a blurry line between somebody accusing you of saying, "Oh, that's fan fiction," and you saying, "No, no, no, this is my creation. It's just based on something that." Like, where do you draw the line between fan fiction and inspiration? Does it come down to specifics like character name? Because it could be this character could have survived in that, or could have lived and existed in that world, but it's not that same character, so this doesn't count as fan fiction. I can sell this one for profit. Are there sort of regulations around this?
I mean, there is. So there are the fair use laws, which allow you to. It's the reason why Saturday Night Live can parody Twilight, or people can write humorous songs about Star Trek, and make money on it. It's fair use is basically saying I'm using the IP in a way where I'm not trying to trick people into thinking that I'm creating the IP. Plagiarism is, there's Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. Plagiarism is Terry Trotter and the Sorcerer's Rock, right? Where
Which, by
you
the way, was a great book. I loved it. No, I'm kidding.
there actually was a plagiarized series that came out called Terry Trotter,
There was a Barry Trotter. I
a
read
Barry Trotter.
Barry Trotter. Yeah,
Yeah.
that was it. Was a parody, wasn't it? It was very, very silly. I think by the same people that wrote Board of the Rings.
Well, no,
And
I'm not talking about a parody. That falls under fair use. That was somebody who was there was
okay,
somebody who
okay.
was trying to rip off. So
Two
that is
different ones. Okay,
plagiarism.
Right.
Um, parody is not it. Parody falls under fair use law,
Yeah. Yeah.
and fan fiction is kind of parody.
Mm.
Where it legally starts to be a problem is if you're trying to trick people into thinking that you actually own the IP or that you are part of the IP. Um, Now, in the 90s, there were a few writers, Anne Rice notably being the biggest name, who sent cease and desists to fan writers, um, and who sued them and who took them to court and won and ruined lives over stories about Lestat and Louis kissing, um, on the internet. So it was just after she passed away and Interview with the Vampire came out, and a lot of the marketing engagement was with fans saying, "Oh, create your own vampire persona. What kind of vampire would you be?" And all of us who were like, "I was there," which don't quote the old magic to me, we were like, hold on, wait a minute. Anne Rice has passed away, and now the marketing teams are encouraging us to write fan fiction. Maybe screw you guys a little bit. Like, hold on. Um, so it there's no hard and fast line, especially for things like 50 Shades of Grey, which was Twilight fan fiction set in a BDSM alternate reality where everyone was human and there were no vampires and werewolves. And then she just changed all the names and published it as 50 Shades of Grey. That Yeah, that happens. I'm trying to answer your question, but the answer is there's no hard and fast rule.
Yeah. It feels blurry, but I think it sounds like people within the community probably wouldn't test those boundaries because they're loyal fans and they're not really in it to try and game the system and make money
Yeah.
from
No,
that's how
I'm
it
just
comes
doing this to
across.
celebrate the community. And if I do want to make money off of it, I will respect the creators whose work I'm
Mm,
um, honoring, and I will file the serial numbers off of it.
right.
I will
So
do something different with it.
something that did occur to me, and you can tell me whether I'm onto something here or not. It occurred to me that writing fan fiction might be a very good way of learning how to, I would say, maybe toughen up when it comes to feedback.
Oh, yes.
Because I can imagine this community, as loving and creative as they are, they're going to let you know if you didn't quite get this one right. Does that happen?
Yes. So we call that concrit, constructive criticism.
Hmm.
And it's quite tasteless to offer concrit to somebody who did not request it. So if I post something and somebody said, "I really loved this was fantastic, thank you so much. Also, there's a spelling error in paragraph 3," I'd be like, "Oh my God, thank you so much." That's not concrete. When someone comes in and says, "John Shepherd would never do that, and that's completely not believable, and this is the worst thing I've ever seen," that's unacceptable. You can maybe email the person and say, "Hey, I have some constructive criticism for you. Would you be interested in receiving it?" But not everybody is. Um, at the same time, we also have beta readers and we have communities where you can say, "I've finished this story. Does somebody want to read it and give me feedback?" Especially for North American writers, we have Brit pickers. So it'll be somebody who, if I write a Sherlock fan fiction, but I write it as a Canadian who's only visited the UK twice, I would send it to you and you'd say, "Why is John Watson talking about his underwear?" And I said, "No, no, no, he's wearing a nice pair of pants." And
Right.
you're like, "No, trousers," right? Brit picking instead of nitpicking. And
Right.
we do it the other way around. People help one another.
Right.
But
Right.
you do get flamers, people who are just cruel for the sake of being cruel.
Hmm.
And there are shipping wars, people who believe that those two characters should never have gotten together. They will never get together. It's awful. You can't imagine that Kirk and Spock are kissing. That's wrong because it should be Kirk and Bones kissing. So you have, and anything that people are passionate about, they will sometimes get too engaged in. So in the same way that footy hooligans will punch somebody else in the face for wearing the wrong color, in the wrong pub, which to me blows my mind. Like, who cares?
And you've
Um,
only been to the UK twice, and
yeah.
you've seen.
Only saw one rugby game. It was Canada versus Wales, and we got our butts handed to us.
Yeah, the
And I
Welsh are
was with
good.
some of the cast of Doctor Who at the time, and they were just like, haha. And I'm like, no, no, no. It's I expected this outcome, guys. Don't worry
Right.
about it. Um, yeah, so in the same way that you have those sort of intense rivalries that spill out into the real world and people genuinely, passionately engage that way, you get that with fandom too. People
Mm,
who have passionate, stubborn beliefs and let them affect their enjoyment of a property or other people's enjoyment of a property, which is totally
yeah.
uncool and we don't love it, but it happens.
And like I said, it toughens you up. I think you have to be any form of writer. I think you
Yes.
have to learn how to manage your emotions, how
Mhm.
to allow enough time to pass between reading the criticism and responding to it, because
Yeah.
oftentimes your initial
Or
reaction is,
not.
yeah, or not responding to it, depends on the source. So
Yes.
I think I personally think that might be one of the better reasons to try fan fiction,
Mhm.
because you do expose yourself to people who know what you're trying for in certain ways, so they can give
Yes.
you valid feedback.
Yeah. And especially if you're engaging with a writing group
Mm,
from whom you're requesting that feedback, um, it's really great practice
yeah.
for to hear that I don't buy this. This doesn't work. There's a plot hole here.
Mm,
You're telling me that this person is like this, but when it comes to this moment, they behave like that. This doesn't mesh. Um, so yeah, absolutely. It's great practice. It's great practice for being part of a writing community. Because even the screenwriters I know, we will read each other's work and we'll do table reads. And then at the
mhm.
end of the table read, you pour everybody a glass of wine and you say, okay, where do I suck?
Well, now I'm definitely in. If there's a glass of wine at the end of it, I mean, you could have just led with
Yes.
that. But
Yes.
in all seriousness, I think I am on board to give fan fiction a try, having
Hmm.
spoken to you at length about it. I'm excited about it. And I'm sure that there's many people listening that have never done that before. So for me and for them, where do we get started? What would you say is step number one, going from 0 to 1 as a fan fiction writer?
I would head to Archive of Our Own, AO3 is what it's called colloquially. And Archive of Our Own was created by a fan fiction writer named Astolat, who saw in 2007 and around that time the independent companies that owned blogging platforms and social media platforms were being influenced by foreign policy. And something called the Great Strike Through of 2007 happened, where a whole bunch of live journals were unceremoniously and without warning deleted. And people just lost their work. And it's because LiveJournal was, I mean, there were many reasons, but the main reason is that LiveJournal was purchased by a Russian company, and the Russians are emphatically anti-queer, and a lot of fan fiction uh, centers queer voices because a lot of us are queer and we don't see ourselves in media, so we wedge open space in the narrative and we jam ourselves into a property that we otherwise don't see ourselves in. There's actually a really great essay, if you want to read about it, by Helix and Imbus called Making Room for Mary Sue at Hogwarts. I recommend that one highly if you're interested in the academic side of fan fiction. But so this Russian company deleted all of these websites that had gay fan fiction on it. But on top of that, also all these websites that were talking about abuse, not because it was kinky abuse, but it got lost with everything else. So abuse survivor blogs, resource blogs, and breastfeeding blogs where new mothers were helping one another were deleted because there were titties. Um, so so much was lost in that, and it happens over and over again that good resources and good stories get lost because of somebody else's biases or censoring or bans. So Astolat finally was like, forget this. We're going to buy our own servers. We're going to fundraise. We're going to buy our own servers, and we're going to do an archive of our own. And the great thing about AO3 is that the tagging system is so robust, and the moderation around the tagging is so robust. You don't want to see, you don't have to complain. You just click the button that says, I don't want to see this. And yeah, and it's a wonderful archive. It's very well organized. It's organized by fandom, and then from fandom to pairings, and then, you know, anything you want. So you could, if you want an X-Files royalty AU arranged marriage with Mulder and Scully, and that's specifically something you want, all you have to do is click all the tags, click, 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 click. I want it in English. I want it over 10,000 words, and I want it to already be complete.
Wow.
There's everything there.
Wow. It's like a
Yeah.
search engine specifically for fan fiction.
Yes. And then they host the stories directly on their server, directly on their website.
Right.
So you don't have to click elsewhere to find it. Now, there's lots of stuff that's wonderful outside of AO3. Fanfiction.net predated AO3, but the same thing happened. It got purchased by another company, and it started locking down on certain kinds of stories. And the problem is, when you start censoring and banning one thing, it's a slippery slope to censor and ban anything else. So the great thing about AO3 is that you can post anything you want, and you can read anything you want, but you're a grown-up, curate your own experience. And that means that everything's allowable. So go into it knowing that you might have to curate your own experience, but freedom of expression is freedom of expression. And if you start saying, well, no, you can't have stories with this in it, then it's a slippery slope to start banning other things. And again, great thing about AO3 is that their board of directors is very, very careful about maintaining everyone's right to post whatever they want.
I love that. I love that.
Yeah.
I'll be sure to check that out. And I think what you've done there is pointed us towards some really good places to start seeing what fan fiction looks like, what the community looks like, some different samples of it. And then let's just say we've done that, and I'm ready to start putting pen to paper. It's probably more like fingers to keys.
Yes.
Where do we get started? Do we just sit down and start writing based on a show that we like? Is it as easy as that? Should we research something? Should we think about it in terms of, you know, I overthink everything. So I'm looking for advice here on how to give something a try without overthinking it too much.
I mean, the great thing about fan fiction, the great thing about the internet is that there's no word count limit. So it can be as short or as long as you want. The longest fan fiction posted on AO3 is like 9 million words, something like that. But the shortest is, again, going back to Sherlock fandom, people would do something called 221Bs. So it was 221 words, and the final word of the story had to end in a B, or had to have be a B word, right? Bottle, button, bank, something like that. Right. So it's a great intellectual exercise. Can you tell an entire vignette story in 221 words?
And end on a B word.
And end with a B word. There are challenges called Big Bangs, where you try to do like 50,000 words, or Art Bangs, where someone draws a beautiful piece of art, and then you're like, okay, based on that piece of fan art that someone drew, now I'm going to try to write a story based on that. Just read a bunch would be my first suggestion. They can be short, they can be long, they can be loosely strung together in a series, they can be the length of a novel, they can be the length of a picture book, they can be a poem. It can be, I mean, meta is fantastic. It's when someone says, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to analyze the use of music in this one specific episode. If you listen at minute 273, you hear this theme, which harkens back and connects to this, which happened in another episode. So you can do the analysis kind of stuff. There are it's not maybe the push that you were hoping for, but the great thing about fan fiction is you can just sit down and do it.
Just sit down and do it. That's
Yeah.
probably the lesson I need to learn more than any other as a writer. Jess, this has been phenomenal. This has been enlightening and inspiring for me. Where can people go if they want to learn more about you, your fan fiction, the books that I see sitting behind you? Where's the best place to send people?
Well, if you'd like to check out my fan fiction, my fiction is available on AO3. My name is Losyark, Losyark, and you can read my fan fiction there. You can also read some of my original stories on AO3 because you can also put original fiction on AO3 if you like. For the rest of the professional writing, you can find me at jmfrey.net. And my socials are either j.m.frey, F-R-E-Y again, or scifrey, S-C-I-F-R-E-Y.
Perfect. Thank you. I love it when people just have all that stuff locked down. They can just spew it out. We can put it in the description. People can come and find you. And we're all in this together. So the more people I can send your direction, the better. So thank you so much again for your time today, Jess. This really has been enlightening. And I hope we can continue to keep in touch and speak about this because I think it's a new avenue for me to explore.
I would love to, and I really hope that everybody out there who wants to be a screenwriter or a television writer or a video game writer does take a look at some fan fiction, read it, maybe give writing it a try, but it really will help you learn how to write within the worlds that you want to work with.
Yeah, I think so too. Well, until next time, when we talk about climate change, I'll say cheerio. You take care now.
Bye-bye.
Thanks so much for watching today's episode with J.M. Frey. Are you inspired to go ahead and give fan fiction a try? I certainly am. I will be heading over to those websites that Jess mentioned towards the end there. Before you head off and enjoy the rest of your day, go ahead, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. We do put out weekly content just like this podcast. We also have a newsletter you can subscribe to at rightinthehead.org. It's a free community. We do the podcast, the newsletter, and we occasionally meet live on Zoom to discuss all things screenwriting. Finally, if there is a video popping up on your screen right now, probably in one of the bottom corners, I think, go ahead and click that to enjoy another episode. We will see you there.